Hello, I'm Peter Freer. I'm founder and CEO of Play Attention, and welcome to Stress and the Brain. My background is in neuroscience and education. I've been in the field of neuroscience and neurotechnology for close to 30 years now, and I've appeared on Good Morning America a couple of times. I've been featured in Time magazine. I've lectured on behalf of NASA at the National Space Society Conference, and I've lectured at the United Nations on neurotechnology and how it works. Today, we are interested in stress in the brain, and I am happy to be presenting this because I think there's no more significant time or relevant time than right now. So if we understand the mind-body connection, that'll be one of our goals today as well, and we'll talk about that a little bit further as we go forward in the presentation. In the agenda, what we want to cover is the mind-body connection, how stress affects the mind, our emotions, the body, and behavior, and how this is a cycle. We also want to talk about chronic stress, what that means, because if we have just minor stress, there are near-term consequences. And if we have chronic stress, then we actually have long-term outcomes that we want to be aware of. Now, I know this will probably elicit many questions. So if you would, just type your questions in your chat box and I'll answer them at the end. And so that way we can address all of the questions at one time and make certain that everyone is accounted for. All right, so please just enter your questions in the chat box. You can find it on your screen. What we'll also want to do at the end, after we understand this process of the stress mechanism, is how to reduce it, how to gain control over it. And I'll also discuss neurotechnology and healing, which is very, very important, how we can use neurotechnology to heal. One of the things that I found most profound in all of my work over the past 30 years is that everything we've ever experienced, every starry night sky, every full moon, every sunset, every kiss, everything that we've ever learned in school, every bit of stress we've ever experienced, COVID or otherwise, everything that is us is reduced down to the random firing of neurons in the brain. All right, the brain is an organ of reduction of sensory input. All of our sensory inputs, our five senses, are reduced to just this. This is our internal universe, and it is hardwired to a certain extent. The great thing about the brain is that we can change it, and we have to be aware of certain things in order to make changes, especially regarding stress. But all of our experience are reduced to these random firing of neurons in the brain, and they are our consciousness. And this statement, the third bullet point down here, is very profound. Our consciousness is its content. Everything that is here and saved and stored and processed in the brain is my consciousness. My consciousness is all of what I have learned, all of what I've done. It is its content. Now, why I have the autonomic nervous system listed on the last bullet point is very important, because there are things that go on, certain mechanisms in the brain that are triggered, and we don't have conscious control over them or even realize that they're happening. So we'll discuss those as well in their relationship to stress, because that actually is a way that we can help cope or manage our stress. A primary function of the brain is to create order, right? How to make sense out of the world. And that's one of the primary jobs of the brain. How do we create order in the world? Now, how many people here, you can put a hand up if you can acknowledge this, how many of our people in attendance here say that the order to my world has gotten turned upside down? Making sense of all, wow, yeah, there are a lot of hands being raised. Our order has been turned upside down, and that obviously promotes stress. Because order, which is what my brain thrives upon doing for me, making sense of the world, putting things into order for me. Even at night when we sleep, if things aren't in order, your brain tries to put them in order during dreams. And you get some really bizarre combinations of things that happen in dreams. But order is primary. And when we get our order turned upside down, we are all stressed. So I think we're all stressed to a great degree right now, to a certain extent, some of us more than others, and we'll go into management of that. But we have to understand that stress has both near-term consequences and long-term consequences. All right, so let's discuss those and try to get an understanding of the near-term and long-term consequences. And I'm going to use World War II as a background to this. Now, if you want to know what these soldiers are doing, they're about to storm the beach at Normandy, one of the most ferocious, vicious battles of World War II. This amphibious transport is taking them to shore. And what they're looking at on shore, did you see the movie Saving Private Ryan? The first 20 minutes in there are just unbelievably compelling and horrifying at the same time. So you know what they're looking at. They are staring into the jaws of death. When that steel plate drops, when they're close to the beach, they're going to have to run into the beach, and they're going to see that their colleagues, their fellow soldiers, right, are blown to bits on that beach. The water leading up to the beach is red with blood. The sand is stained with blood. There are bits and pieces of their fellow soldiers laying on the beach, and they're supposed to run into that. They have been shredded by 50 caliber machine gun fire and mortar, and they are going into the jaws of death. Now, the government took statistics on what the reactions of these men were. So near term, when the stress mechanism is hit with such ferocity as it was here, not only do you get a sick stomach, but you'll vomit, right? The body is saying, I don't need any of this food in my gut. Out it comes either this end, or you may soil yourself, right? May urinate on yourself. These fellows did. They passed around vomit buckets. They didn't have those, they used their helmet. And many of them soiled themselves one way or the other. And that's the near-term consequence. Well, what's the long-term consequence, right? The near-term consequence happens because our gut, everybody here, how many people here, raise hand, if you've ever said, well, I have a gut feeling about something. I have a gut feeling. Okay. Your gut actually has over 100 million nerve cells in it. It's a small brain unto itself, and that's in your gut. So when we say I have a gut feeling, there is some validation, some validity to that statement. It's not a brain that would ever write a novel, but it does have a certain control, and it communicates with this brain quite quickly. In certain cases, if I've eaten 3 slices of pizza, my gut says, okay, that's enough pizza, stop eating. If I'm under incredible stress, it may say you need to go to the bathroom, right? Or it can play a variety of roles that happen very, very quickly in this messaging system between both brains. Near-term consequences, long-term consequences. This is a soldier lived in real life. If you rolled up in real life 10 John Waynes into one person, it's this little fellow right here, Audie Murphy. Now, Audie is probably predates most of the folks here. Audie was one of the most decorated soldiers of all time. He won every award for valor and heroism issued by the United States Army. He was actually issued awards for heroism by France and Belgium on top of that. And he came from nothing. Poor parents were poor dirt farmers in Texas. He lied about his age to get into the military. But at age 19, his company was ambushed by Germans. He single-handedly, and while wounded, fought off the Germans and held off until his company got reinforcements, and he ended up killing many Germans in the process, received awards for that. In southern France again, at another fight, Audie was ambushed by Germans. Germans retreated to a house. His company seized upon them. He ended up killing a couple of them, and they feigned surrender. They came out of the house. His best friend came up to escort them out of that area and take them as captives. When he got up close enough to them, they killed his best friend. single-handedly. He crawls up on the house under heavy fire, and he takes that house. He kills many of the Germans, wounds many of them, and he brings back 11 captives, prisoners of war, by himself, and he's wounded again during all of that. So unprecedented magnitude. But you can imagine, and those are just a couple of stories. If you want to, he made a movie when he got back. He became a film star because he was a hero. So he made a movie called To Hell and Back. Fantastic story, great old movie. And then he made Westerns. And he was a songwriter and a rancher, a movie star on top of that. What happened long term? Well, PTSD wasn't identified in those days. They called it shell shock. We didn't really know what it was. And a lot of times they thought these guys were just acting, playing. There's nothing wrong with them. They just don't want to go back. There's something wrong. Long-term consequences of stress. There's the poster child right here. He is quintessential of the problems with prolonged stress. So he became an alcoholic. Then he started on drugs. And then he slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, and his relationships fell apart. So we do know that stress provides near-term problems, right? Consequences, and then long-term. And that's why we're here, because we want to figure out what it is we can do. We want to determine what steps we can take to get this under control, right? So what is it? What is stress? This Latin phrase under here, mens sana in corpore sano, is a great phrase. It means a healthy mind and a healthy body. So thousands of years ago, our ancestors knew that the two are related. They knew that in order to have a balance, we had to have a healthy mind and a healthy body. So we found that stress is a reactive process. It's a reaction, right? And triggers force my reaction. And these triggers force a reaction of that in me internally, I feel emotional discord. I feel unbalanced. So there is no perfect definition of stress, but we do know it is a reactive process in the brain that triggers internal emotional discord. The trigger can be either a physical event or it could be a thought process. It's something I'm thinking about. Now here's how this all balances out, how this flows through us here. In my mind, if I'm subjected to stress, many times my mind goes about into the most negative part of life. I become dark in my thought, negative in my thoughts. I have troubled thoughts that don't seem to stop. I can't get clear thought. My thought is nonstop. I try to go to bed and at night and try to fall asleep, but this talk just keeps going and going. Then because of that, I make poor decisions. I worry and I fret, and I can't pay attention to anything. Then what does that do? Excuse me. What does that do to my body? Well, this is just a partial list, right? Stomach issues, muscular tension, skin, tics, inflammation, fatigue, headaches, acne, you name it, the body will respond to it in various ways. And we'll talk about this mechanism in just a moment so you kind of see the link. How does that affect my emotions? Well, then I get a short temper and I start to doubt myself and about the decisions I make. Sadness overtakes me at times. I get withdrawn and I don't feel like doing anything. And I'm nervous all the time. And how does that affect my behavior? Well, I lack coordination at that point. And chances are I'll increase something to help medicate this, which means probably drinking or smoking. I could have a loss of sex drive, of libido, could have a loss of appetite. Now, loss of appetite and increased appetite actually can happen. It just depends on the person. If my trigger is stress, sometimes we have what we call stress eating, right? Well, we just try to get comfort food and we pile it in. Sometimes, and I experienced this recently, my bookkeeper and friend of 36 years passed suddenly. I didn't feel like eating for a day or two at all. Period, just couldn't do it. And finally, a little at a time, it started coming back. And so the reason that I was able to cope, I think, with it is because I actually know the mechanism and I'm aware of what's happening at that time. And this mechanism comes from eons and eons ago with our ancient ancestors. Our ancient ancestors, when they were facing peril, facing mastodons, a pack of wolves, saber-toothed tigers, when they faced this, they had a flee, right, run away, or fight mechanism in the brain. Now, some of them didn't have that flee or fight mechanism. Some just stood there and froze, right? Those people did not play as big a role in the evolution of our brains, because the ones that stayed and froze in front of a mastodon charging ended up dead. So they did not carry that genetic line and that propensity in the brain, right? These ancestors that were able to flee or fight their way out of situations, their brains became the brain that we have today. The stress mechanism that takes this sight and sound and processes it very quickly is the brain that we use today. The same brain that was developed through eons of fight or flight type of living. All right. This is the same stress mechanism we have today. Here's how it looks in the brain. The stress mechanism essentially happens because there's that trigger, right? And when I have the trigger, it sends messages to the brain. Now, let's say I am walking down a dark street at night. I'm coming from a grocery store, of a bag of groceries in my arm, and I'm walking down a dark street at night, and I hear footsteps behind me. And I listen to them, and they seem to be getting closer, and there are a couple of them behind me. And so those messages get relayed to the brain. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And so the amygdala, this little pink portion of the brain right here, is a specialist in processing that type of information. It's going to say, hey, I know from hundreds of thousands and millions of years ago, this is danger. You got to hoof it. Start running. So it immediately specializes in this processing, right? It then sends a code red alert to another portion of the brain. You can see it's very close to the amygdala, right? Called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is your command center. It's going to start ordering your body to do certain things, like run, and give it a burst of energy to do that. So the hypothalamus gets that controlled code red alert, right? It says someone is going to harm you, run, right? So you run all the way to your house with this burst of energy, because right here, you can see that the hypothalamus communicates immediately to the adrenal glands. Now I'm making this something that's incredibly complex, very, very simple, so it's understandable. So there are many facets to this, but when you boil it down, this is what's happening. The adrenal glands actually sit right on top of our kidneys. And the adrenal glands give off hormones, chemicals that give us bursts of energy for short periods of time, right? And the adrenal glands give off cortisol, stress hormone, norepinephrine, stress hormone, adrenaline, stress hormone. They course through our body rapidly. That gives us the ability to either stand there and fight or run like crazy. So then I get to my house and I'm under the street lamp after being chased by this thing behind me. And I notice when I turn around, it's an old man walking his dog, and the old man has a cane. That's why I heard many footsteps. All right. So there is a relationship to actual physical danger, but there's also a relationship to how we think about that physical danger. If I think that there is danger when there is not, it compounds the situation. And we do this quite frequently in modern stress. Modern stress, I don't have to worry about being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or a pack of wolves or trampled by a mastodon. Right? Modern stress is quite different from what our ancestors experienced. However, the mechanism that was developed based on this is the same mechanism we use today to handle modern stress. And it causes what we call chronic stress. Chronic stress, all right? Chronic stress is now the modern brain's use of this ancient mechanism for stress, fight or flee, in things that I have to consider, contemplate, or consider. My work, COVID, bills, my relationships. So things I think about. And then there is the physical. Sometimes we're in a car accident. And if it is, then that's here and now, and that's a big stress. Sometimes I might fall and injure my leg and I have to go to the hospital, and that's big stress. That's physical. But we have to understand the relationship between situational stress, the way we think about things, and our physical stress and how we manage that. These are just partial lists, right, of chronic stressors. And by chronic, remember, now we're not facing life and death. We're facing everyday work. And people may stress me at work, but it's not like they're going to eat me like a saber-toothed tiger or trample me like a mastodon. Yet that same mechanism I apply to work. COVID-19. COVID, a virus, if I don't have it, it's not a physical stressor. It's a stressor that exists up here. Because I'm thinking about this virus that's lurking somewhere out in the free world and whether I'll get it or not. And how my thought, remember, as a stress mechanism, typically the brain will say, go to the worst case scenario. You're going to get this. It's going to kill you. And of course, then your thoughts become negative and dark, and the world is gloom and doom. Does anyone raise your hand if this has happened to you? Because you watch these talking heads on TV, right? And you go, oh my God, this is the end of days. This is horrible, right? And many people think like this. It's incredible to see this happen because this stress mechanism takes off and we're not even conscious of it. And it is natural for the brain to do it because it's been programmed to do that for us. Survival. But now we stress over toilet paper, right? We stress over homeschooling with the same mechanism that our ancestors used to fend off wolves and tigers. So there is a big problem here because now we are chronically stressed every day by everything. Now, long-term consequences and short-term consequences are there. And how it affects your health. This is all about health and how to stay balanced, because the more we stress, the more we invite bad health, the more we invite unhealthy habits and personal health that will decline. This is all related, and this is not Freer talking. This is years of medical knowledge. You can read about the effects of stress on your health. How to manage it is key. All right. So here's what we know. This is what we've already talked about. Stress is reactionary, right? It's the way that my brain manages these triggers. Now, the triggers for us, I'll go back one slide, could be any of these or more. But there are few times in which we have to run and flee for our lives. But we still respond with that same stress mechanism because it's reactionary and it's part of an unconscious system, the autonomic nervous system. So unless we control that, we're bound just to repeat this all over again. And we'll go back to that cycle I mentioned previously. If we just keep repeating it, we just keep going through this cycle and it gets worse and worse. And so we have to think about what we're doing. We have to consider it, because the great thing about the brain is that it will change for us. It will make changes for us. But we have to have the brain initiate those changes. So if my reaction is my coping mechanism, I am doomed to repeat that cycle. If I'm just reacting. Now, Customato, for those people who have never experienced boxing, Customato was a very famous boxing coach, world renowned. He was Mike Tyson's boxing coach. And most of you know Mike Tyson's ferocity, viciousness, and incredible record in the ring. This phrase down here, I'm paraphrasing, Cuss. but it is an amazing and profound statement. Fear, stress is like fire. It can bake your bread, or it can burn your house down. So what is the relationship to that, and what is the meaning behind it? What is the meaning? Let's use that part of the brain that helps give us order. What is the meaning of this? It can bake your bread or burn your house down. It depends, what Cuss is saying, it depends on how you manage it. Now, Mike Tyson managed it with such ferocity that other men were terrified to get in the ring with him. I could watch them come to the ring when I'm watching his boxing matches, and I would watch them come to the ring, and you could see they were defeated before they ever stepped in the ring. They were so afraid that they were shutting down and could not even fight. And Mike would hit them with 1 or 2 punches and they were totally unconscious. So it can bake your bread or burn your house down. It depends on how we manage it. And that's what it's necessary for us to examine. So here's another part of management. Remember that the stress mechanism is an unconscious mechanism. It goes into play, but it can be managed because we have control over certain aspects of our brain that we are not aware of. One of the things that we have control over is the way we think about things. The more I think about my problems, the worse they seem to become, at least in my mind. Your mind, in order to put things in order, is a great storyteller. It will tell you stories about what happened during your day and your history. We all have great stories. I am the worst at doing this. I have great stories about my teaching days. I was a professional fighter. I have great stories about my professional fighting days. And this is how my brain remembers them. Now, are they indeed totally fact? Well, once we study about the way the brain remembers things, they're only about 50% accurate, if even that, as to what actually happened in the past. Our brain is good at creating stories that help us make sense of the world. Now, when we start to make stories up about our problems in general, our stress mechanism usually wants to take us to the far end of that spectrum, to worst case scenario, because that mechanism is all about survival. If I go to the worst end of that worst scenario, I go to the worst scenario and I can defeat that in my mind, then I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. But in going to the worst end of it, it increases our stress levels, our amounts of cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine getting shot into the blood, because in my mind, I'm fighting a fight that's not even there. I'm fighting a story over and over and over again. Can we control this? Absolutely. How many here say this? I fear the unknown. Raise your hand. Yeah, I totally fear the unknown. One of the things I found when I was fighting is that I could think about a fight, and this is full out, just like you see in the UFC octagon. There is strangulation, there is breaking of joints, there are knees and punches and kicks. No matter how much I thought about a fight, it was never close to the reality of the fight, right? It's a story I'm making in my mind. So when I realized that, I became an incredibly good fighter because there's nothing to fear. I fear the unknown is, if you look at that statement, you cannot fear the unknown. The unknown is unknown. We don't know it. It's a blank slate. We can't fear it. What we do fear is what thought, the stress mechanism, provides for us. It provides this storyline for us that we create and we go through in our minds, and all the monsters and bad things, dark thoughts that get associated with the unknown govern what we do, govern our reaction to stress. You cannot fear the unknown. The unknown is the unknown. It's blank. what we fear is what we put into storyline. Of course, that's the brain's job. If you look at my last line down here, the last bullet point, well, why does all this happen? Well, it's the brain's job, right? It's the brain's job to do this. This is the stress mechanism. The brain is hardwired to do this. And unless you take charge of it, it's going to do it for you. And it takes you into places you don't need to be. So the more I think, the more I worry. Thought and stress are incredibly related. The more you think, look at them as almost like thermometers. The more I think, the more I worry. I think more, my worry goes up. My stress levels go up. They happen in parallel. They happen in tandem. All right? So we cannot fear the unknown, but we will make a story that we will fear. I think about my problems, I make them worse. I create a story for it. This is all chronic stress. I keep this going internally. The more I think, the more I worry. These two words, this is my Mr. Rogers moment. Can you say exacerbate? Can you say aggravate? They really mean almost the same thing. It means to take a bad situation and make it worse. All right? These two words really describe the stress mechanism. To exacerbate or aggravate something that's already bad, our original trigger, and then our mind gets hold of it, right? And the mind starts taking us down these dark alleys. So it's exacerbate or aggravate. But it is the mechanism. So now that we understand the mechanism, we have a way to manipulate the mechanism. All right? So we want to go through these tips on how to lessen your stress in the first place and have a balance. And it's not difficult. These are not something that you're going to have to spend years doing. These are things you just apply and become aware of. The more you become aware of it, the more you can respond appropriately instead of over-responding to a stress mechanism that is designed to take you to the worst case scenario immediately. Number one, this is the basis for our conversation today, for the webinar today, is to understand how your brain works. Now, I've gone through a broad overview about how that stress mechanism actually happens, where it came from, how it basically followed genetic lines all the way up to the modern brain. So we know how the brain works now. We know how that stress mechanism works. But we also know there are autonomic systems in play. In other words, things happen unconsciously. So if we don't watch what's happening, we don't become aware of it, we just go through the same cycle that we've all experienced up to this point. By becoming aware of the triggers and how I'm responding and what my thought starts throwing out, then we actually start to manage it. Now, I know this is simple, but this works. All right? Understanding the mechanism teaches us how to prevent these unconscious things from going on and start to manage our lives. If this is too abstract, raise your hand. But if you understand, well, I tell you what, if you understand what I'm talking about at this point, let me know. I don't want to be so abstract. Great. Great. Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. I'm so glad that most of us here are kind of understand what the heck we're talking about at this point. So number one, biggest tip, understand how this mechanism works and learn the triggers and be aware of it. Then we can manage. That's number one. Number two, be aware of what we consume by mouth and by our eyes and ears. All right. Remember, the stress triggers are primarily visual and auditory. Your two primary stress triggers are visual and auditory. Very important. So if you're sitting around, because we're not able to work, right? And we're sitting around at home, and I have one of these 24/7 news stations on, and I'm listening to it 6-8 hours a day. Anybody here doing that? Because if you do, it'll drive you crazy. right? Quite a few of us do this. All right, it's important that you don't do that. 24/7 news, when you understand it, they have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that they have to fill this big vacuum, this void for information. They sit around a morning production meeting and say, okay, here's what the angles we're going to take today. This is how we'll present it. Here's what's happening at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they fill it. And they have primarily the same thing said over and over and over again because they have a message they want to give you. They want you to listen to this message and become scared, because if you stay tuned to them, they know that you're watching. And then therefore, the people that present commercials to you on that pay them more on that show, pay you more, or pay them more, excuse me. They pay them more. So they want you watching as much as they can keep you glued to the TV. Big mistake. Because if you listen to the same message said by different people over and over again, who really don't have an answer, a lot of it is simple prognostication. They're guessing. They're taking a good guess at it. It's not helping you to watch different guessers over and over and over again, because your mind will go to a very dark place. So beware of what you consume with your eyes and ears, because remember, in stress, 2 of our primary triggers are visual and auditory. So what do? Do we just not watch the news? No, watch the news. Watch a good news program for maybe half an hour to get an overall sense of what's going on in the world, right? Watch it for half an hour, maybe in the morning, maybe watch another half an hour in the evening, but you can get enough to run your life just by doing that. To stay tuned and watch gloom and doom over and over again leads you to a very dark place. And of course, at that point, your body responds. But then you want to consume a whole pizza at night and then have a container of Haagen-Dazs on top of it. So we really don't want to be there, because that promotes ill health. So remember, be aware of what you're consuming, quality time. You know, there are so many great videos on the web right now. If you wanted to learn to play guitar, to play piano, to learn art, and these are all free. You wanted to learn how to fix your car, if you wanted to learn quantum mechanics or quantum gravity, these are all online. You can expand your mind and learn new things and promote good health. But if you start and just absorb this pounding of doom and gloom, you get nowhere except ill health. And then, of course, it affects your body. So there's that cycle we just continue. Number 3, self-talk. Self-talk is so important because it can create a cycle of negativity that you just can't seem to get out of. It can create depression, extreme sadness, and it causes a great deal of problems. So we have to watch our self-talk. We have to become aware of our self-talk. In other words, I can't keep positing negative scenarios. If they're not real, it's a storyline that I'm listening to coming right out of this news station here. So we want to make certain that we focus on being positive and to move the spotlight away from me and shine it on people around me. I've heard it said, and I am of the same thought, that kindness is the highest form of intelligence. The ability to shine kindness, to show kindness to another person, to an animal, to everyone around you, is probably one of the highest forms of intelligence. It's not negative, it's very positive. And if I move away from trying to just think about myself and, oh, my worries about myself, and I actually exhibit kindness and I listen to other people, and that's what kindness implies. It's hard to be kind if I can't listen and empathize with someone else. If I listen to someone else and I can have an empathy and I can understand them, then this greatly affects the way I work internally. So I want to make certain that I understand that negative self-talk is totally unproductive, but you can't stop it, right? You don't need to stop it. You understand it. The moment you understand what it is, let me just tell you to try that. Try to understand when you see and hear negative self-talk, you understand what it is and the effect it has. If you do this, tell me what happens internally. I don't want to tell you, have you imagine it actually happen, but you'll see what happens. It's an amazing thing the mind does. By exhibiting kindness and taking the spotlight off of your worries and helping others, this is another powerful tool to change your reaction to stress. Mindfulness. Mindfulness is being in the moment. Very few of us do that because we're so stressed. We have these constant stories playing in our minds, and it's very difficult to be in the moment. Now, you don't have to sit for mindfulness. You don't have to sit and in a Zen meditation at all. Mindfulness can be done while you're on a walk in your neighborhood in the park. It could be done while you're cleaning the house. It could be done while you're washing dishes. We can be in the moment. Because when we're not in the moment, that void is just like the 24/7 TV. That void gets filled because our brain is wired to do it. So if we're mindful, then the chatter turns off. But the mind doesn't like that. So the mind will try to fill that void with negative self-talk. The more that we practice mindfulness, the better off that and more healthier our brains actually become, right? It brings about order. See that? Being mindful brings about order, which is what has been turned on its head right now. Being in the moment and understanding the situation, understanding how our bodies and our minds respond to it, that brings about order. I'm going to take us back to where we started. Mens sana in corpore sano. Healthy mind creates a healthy body. This is a cycle that we are in control of. Now, it's easier to do with neurotechnology, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute. But to do this, you start exercising. Start moving away from the norm of just stress eating, stress watching TV, fretting. Start taking a walk. Become social. Remember, and this relates back to our previous slide, empathy and kindness. Changes you, changes your world. And by understanding that this is an incredibly, we are on a small blue dot in space. We are on this planet for a very short time. And as I've grown older, this time goes by exponentially faster. It just seems, a year seems to go by in the blink. We are here for a very, very short trip. Make the most of it. And the only way to do that is to be mindful and to make certain we are not just reactionary and shortening our lives because of a reactionary process in the brain. I did talk to you a little bit about, and this is going to start winding down a little bit, and I will take questions at the end here. I came up with neurotechnology to help people get into understanding, to understand the way their brains function and to gain control over it. And that was play attention. So that people could use neurotechnology, the simple armband that will monitor neurosignal. And it gives us the opportunity to see what's happening in here in real time. Because for some of us, that's very difficult to do. Neurotechnology actually does that. And I have trained Da Vinci robotic surgeons using this technology, NASA astronauts, nuclear scientists, so many Olympic athletes, NASCAR drivers. it's very, very effective to use neurotechnology to train the brain to do what we want it to do. Because remember, the unconscious things that happen there are somewhat difficult to surmount unless we have the ability to do what we've been talking about. But that's what neurotechnology does. It actually gives you control over your brain, which is composed of all those neurons that hardwire us. And it gives us the ability to increase our executive function, our cognitive processes, so that we perform better. And that's one of the great things about neurotechnology, and that's why I went into the field and created neurotechnology that's never been seen before. So I think now that we've kind of talked about understanding and how to reduce stress, I think there would be a good webinar coming up. How many people here would be interested in that if we create a webinar on talking about how to heal ourselves, how to heal the people around us? If you're interested in that, I'd love to do one of those with you, because it's meaningful for all of us to be on the same page and to not only have the skills to help ourselves, but have the skills that will help the others around us, right? I think that's very important. So wow, we're getting, the vast majority of us have raised our hands for this. Absolutely. So I think in the future, what we'll do is we'll send you out a message that says, okay, let's go ahead and we'll talk about how to heal in doing this. I'd be delighted to do that with you. We'll talk about how neurotechnology can actually help you with that. Upcoming events on June 3rd, how to become a Play Attention certified provider and use the neurotechnology to help others. ADHD Summer Survival Guide. And we have a summer camp program. Let me go back to that. We have a summer camp program I think you'll be thrilled with. If you have children at home, you need to have some kind of release for them, we have a wonderful summer camp coming up as well. You can find it on the website, and there will be activities there for them to do, for you to do, everything from baking really healthy foods, making really healthy foods, to lessons in different aspects, but just fun. And it may even cause you to laugh a little bit. So that's coming up as well. You can find that on the Play Attention website. How to Play Attention improves executive function, a little bit about what we just talked about. The virtual summer camp, which I just mentioned, those are coming up. And it's free. It costs you nothing. It's just a way for us to outreach to you, right? Take the light off of us and help you. And we extend this to you for free. The summer camp will be a blast. I'm going to be part of it as well. And I think we're going to film a piece of my part today or tomorrow. So remember, these are very important. And also, if you want a consultation about how to use neurotechnology, how Play Attention uses neurotechnology to help heal the brain, help use the executive functions, develop executive functions and cognitive skills, call in for a consultation to get one of those. They're free as well. That is the number to call, or you can email general@playattention.net as well. I am ready to take your questions. So let me get my chat up on screen. Okay, so let's see what we have. Is there a way to see my slides? Got it, okay. Healing skills are the next step, great idea. Thank you, we will put that up. We'll get it off probably within the next couple of weeks. So we'll get those out to everyone. If you want to be registered, okay. One of my colleagues, Gwen, said if you want to be registered for one of those events, type the corresponding number in. So let me go back to that slide so that if you wanted to be part of that, right here. Okay. So if you want to be part of these events and you want to just go ahead and have them send you an email saying, okay, you're confirmed for the June 3rd, June 5th, the free summer camp, that kind of thing. Just type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or, you can type in a couple of them if you want, as many of them as you wish. And that way they'll get back to you. They keep this chat record and they'll get back to you, make certain you're covered for all of this. All right, thank you, Gwen, because I totally forgot that. All right. All right, let me see. how neurotechnology helps reduce stress. Absolutely. We'll talk about that, how it's used to reduce stress. We'll include that in the next healing webinar as well. All right. Muhammad asks, is there a certificate of participation after this lecture is ended? I'll need it in my work. I think Gwen can do that for you. I think she can help you with that. All right, have I missed any other? Yeah, Victoria said, well, you talked about our brains being a flight or fight. And Victoria wants to know, what is our tendency if it is to freeze instead? Whether an innate tendency due to trauma, we may experience stomach signs of stress, but are paralyzed either physically or decision making. And this happens, I think there are a lot of people who simply freeze. Now you're responding to the triggers, right? But the tendency for the fight or flight mechanism usually is to run or to fight. However, you do have many people that will freeze. Now these are the brains that still filtered in. Usually these people were eaten or killed early on, so we don't have as many of them. But it does cause the same type of response mechanisms, whether it is obviously increased stress, but it's whether it's upset stomach or acne or tics or you name it, these things actually affect the same person. So while I focused on fight or flight because that is the mechanism behind most of this, the freeze mechanism actually is in there for quite a few people, and it produces the same type of stress results, long-term and then chronic stress results. And especially when it comes, Victoria mentioned it about decision-making. You freeze on that too. So again, I think this should be part of the healing webinar, and we'll discuss more of that and address it at that point. Susan asks, how does neuroplasticity contrast, complement your talk? And this is really good. Neuroplasticity, for those who are not familiar with the term, means that the brain is plastic in a sense of plastic as being malleable or moldable. So plastic doesn't mean the hard plastic on my desktop. It means malleable or moldable. Neuroplasticity means that the brain will mold, it will shape, reporting in accordance with how we stimulate it or how we provide training to it. So that was the basis behind everything I've talked about in our 5 tips. If we do those 5 tips, we are allowing the brain to reshape for us, because the brain will reshape. That's one of the most fantastic things that I've ever learned about the brain, is that the brain will reshape for us. And that's why I started Play Attention back in, the concept came to me in the mid-1980s, and we had it on the shelves in 1994. So that is a really good comment, Susan. And neuroplasticity is also the foundation for healing. So we'll address that in the next webinar as well. Good questions, great. Jimmy, aloha. All right, we get you signed up. Jerry, will you be talking about brain-gut connection, such as neurotransmitters? Yeah, absolutely, we can talk about that as well. I'll have my staff make certain all of these comments and questions get into that next webinar about healing. Good questions, great group. All right. How can you stop others from spreading their stress on us? Oh, that's a good question, especially Jill, if you are living with them. All right. We should talk about that in the healing portion, because there are ways to negotiate with people, either, especially if you have to live with them. If you have friends that are very negative, how to handle that. We'll talk about that in the healing webinar, which will be coming up next. Really good suggestions. Wow, you guys are making my job a lot easier because these suggestions are terrific. Joanne, good to see you here. We will be able, I think, Gwen, can you tell me, can we post these slides for our viewers? Actually, you know what? We're recording this. So if you want the recording as well, let us know and we'll send you a link to the recording. And I'm certain we'll be able to give you the slides. Katerina said, I have a child with ADD who hates doing homework and yelled and screamed every time we asked him to do some of it with our help. Any suggestions? Yes, you know what? I would suggest you call in for the consultation. And in your case, I would specifically ask for Gwen or Amber, because they have great suggestions on how you get a child to cooperate. And it can be done without punishment. And this is something we specialized in play attention for many, many years. So absolutely, absolutely. I think you should call in, get the consultation, and tell them what you're facing, because this is imperative that you're able to get your child to work with you. And there's nothing more miserable than when you're having to fight with your child, especially when you are the homeschool teacher at that point. Jill said, examples of using positive self-talk. You know, when I was going into a fight where I'm getting locked in a cage with someone who's going to try to knock me out, I could, you know, if I let my negative thought go at that point, Jill, my thought would say, you know what, you could be killed. You know what, you could be crippled. What if he accidentally breaks your neck? What if you get knocked out? What if you get embarrassed in front of your whole family by being knocked out in front of thousands of people? So that's all negative self-talk. So all I did is I didn't use a lot of positive self-talk. I began to be in the moment. I used mindfulness. Mindfulness creates its own type of chatter, which is very positive. So what I'd suggest is you discover what mindfulness is and see the type of talk that comes out of that. The type of talk that takes the light off of your worries and shines it to the outside world. Find out what that is. And we'll talk about that as well in the upcoming webinar. Great question again. Very good, Jill. All right. Let me see if there's anything else. We've got 20 new messages in here. All right. Gwen says that everyone will get slides and the recording. Send the recording, getting a lot of those. Okay. Healing webinar will send you out the notification. And if there are people in your life that this is important to share, make certain you share the conversation today, the webinar today. And also share with them the healing webinar coming up, because sharing that with them may help them work with you, may help change them, especially if they are negative. All right. The number to get the consultation, I'm going to switch to that slide for you right here. All right. So Katerina, there's that number. You can dial it. I'd ask for Amber or Gwen. They are really expert at handling this, and they can give you some really good strategies to use. And that's what we do, you know, at Play Attention. That's who we are. You're going to get great strategies so that you can work with your child and not have to fight. It just is no fun, and it's miserable living like that. All right. Taking notes, like the link for the recording. Okay. I think I have reached the bottom of my chat responses here. I just want to thank you. It's always great to work with Play Attention and to be here to talk with you, because these times are unprecedented. Joanne says, and Joanne runs an incredible center and works with many, many different students. Joanne said, Play Attention healing is life-changing for people, especially children. This is true. And I thank you for everything you're doing for your community. So thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you, Trey. And Fatima, thank you. It's wonderful to have this, to be in Zoom and to be able to communicate with everyone here globally, and to be part of the start of a healing process for all of us. There are better times ahead. This is not the end of the world. We actually have a lot of a good future in front of us. So thank you so much for everyone being here. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Take care, be safe, stay healthy, and we will talk to you soon.
you.